All right, good morning. We're going to get through the last few chapters. I think today will be chapter 20 and 21. And yes, I changed the effect on our recording today. Something different. So, here we go. For the next few days, Matt waited eagerly. Early in the morning, he finished his chores so that at a word from Etienne, he would be ready to set out for the Indian village again. But Etienne did not come. Matt resolved to be patient, but day by day his new confidence began to slide away. Perhaps he'd only imagined that he had passed a test. In Etienne's eyes, perhaps he had failed. It was a week before Etienne came, and the moment Matt saw him, he knew there would be no invitation. The Indian boy was solemn and unsmiling, looking more like his grandfather than ever before. He sat staring at the book Matt opened, his mind plainly miles away. He did not want to listen to a story. He seemed to have forgotten the words he had learned the week before. "I not remember," he said impatiently. "My grandfather teach me many things." "What sort of things?" Etienne did not answer. "Time of hunt comes soon," he said finally. Matt felt suddenly hopeful. Perhaps it was not any failure of his own that had caused Etienne to stay away. Every year Etienne had told him when the leaves had fallen from the trees, the Indians hunted the caribou and the great moose. Whole families moved away from the village to follow the trail of the big animals. Matt knew that more than anything in the world, Etienne longed to hunt with the men. He could imagine now how Etienne must have been staying close to his grandfather these last days, trying to be useful and to prove that he was fit to be one of them. "I not come tomorrow," Etienne added. "Maybe long time." "You're going on the hunt?" Matt tried hard to keep the envy out of his voice. Etienne shook his head. "I go to find my Manitou." Matt was puzzled. Was Manitou another word for moose? "Maybe you call spirit," Etienne explained. "All Indian boy must have Manitou. It is time for me." "How can you find a spirit?" For a moment Matt thought this was one of Etienne's odd jokes, but he had never seen his friend so serious and even troubled. "My grandfather teach me," Etienne repeated. "Manitou come in dream." Then, seeing that Matt was not laughing, that he really wanted to understand, Etienne went on, trying to explain in his clumsy English a mystery that could not truly be explained at all. "Every Indian boy must have a Manitou," he said, before he could take his place as one of the men in his family. He had to find it for himself. No one could help him. His grandfather had been training him for many days. He had to learn many things. Now he must take the test. He would go into the forest alone. First, he would make special preparation, bathe himself carefully, and take a special medicine to make him clean inside and out. Then he would go far into the forest and build himself a wigwam of branches. He would stay there alone for many days. He would not eat anything at all, even berries. After sundown, he would drink a little water from a brook. He would sing the songs his grandfather had taught him and repeat the ancient prayers of his people so that his heart would be worthy. If he did all of this, if he waited faithfully, one day his Manitou would come to him. Then he could go back to his village. He would have a new name. He would be a man and a hunter. What would it be like, this Manitou? Matt questioned. There was no way to know, Etienne told him. It could come in many ways. In a dream, he might see a bird or an animal or even a tree. He might not see anything at all. Instead, he might hear a voice speaking to him. There would be no mistake. When it came, Etienne would recognize that it was meant for him. What if the Manitou should not come? Instantly, Matt was ashamed of his question. A dark shadow had crossed Etienne's face. There was something in his eyes that Matt had never seen there before. Sadness, and even more than that, fear. "I wait," Etienne said. "Till he come, I can never be hunter." Matt could think of nothing at all to say. He felt shut away from his friend in a way that even the boy's scorn had never made him feel. This was something he could not understand or share. If he finds his Manitou, he thought, he will go with the men. He may never come here again. "You'll come back afterwards, won't you?" he asked anxiously, though he knew in his heart that it would never be the same. "I come back," Etienne promised. Waking in the nights that followed, Matt pulled the blanket tighter about his shoulders. It must be very cold in the forest. He could not get Etienne out of his mind. What would it be like sitting in a shelter, just waiting, growing hungrier every day and even more afraid? Because there was no doubt Etienne had been afraid. Matt was sure of that. Etienne was afraid he might fail, that he might have to return to the village and admit that his Manitou had not appeared. For Etienne, this would be a disgrace, a shame that must be terrible if the thought of it had brought fear into his eyes. Even though he dreaded that it would mean the end of all their adventures, Matt hoped that Etienne would find his Manitou. Chapter 21. Then one morning, Etienne returned. Matt had been waiting, watching the forest trail impatiently, unwilling to go far from the cabin lest he missed the boys coming. But when he finally saw Etienne approaching, his heart sank. Etienne was not alone. His grandfather stalked by his side. Matt sensed that this meant trouble. Perhaps Saknus had come to reproach him. He would surely know that the two boys had been neglecting those lessons. Dreading to face the old man, Matt walked out to meet him, courteously giving the greeting he had learned. Saknus returned his greeting with dignity. He did not smile. His solemn face made Matt's heart sink still lower. Then, startled, Matt turned toward Etienne. He did not dare ask a question, but he saw at once that there was no need to ask. He had changed. He stood straighter and taller. He looked older, and Matt suddenly realized why. The black hair, which had always hung down almost to his shoulders, was shaved away. His scalp, like his grandfather's, was bare, except for a single patch running back from his forehead and braided into a topknot fastened with a red string. Like the fresh bear grease that glistened on his skin, pride glistened all over him. Moreover, he carried a gleaming new rifle. "You've got a gun!" Matt cried, politeness forgotten. "My grandfather traded many beaver skin," Etienne answered. Though he had in these last days become a man, he had not learned altogether to hide his feelings. He did not say more. He waited now for his grandfather to speak. The old man's face was grave, but he did not ask about the lessons. "Time of sun get shorter," he said, "like footsteps of bird, soon ice on water." "I know it's October," Matt said, "maybe November." He had not wanted to count his sticks these last few weeks. "Indian go north now," Saknus continued. "Hunt moose. All Indian go. Etienne not come more to learn white man signs." Matt could not answer. White father not come?" Saknus went on. Matt spoke quickly. "He ought to be here any day now." Saknus looked at him soberly. "Maybe him not come," he said quietly. Anger flared up in Matt. He could not allow this man to speak the fear he had never dared to admit to himself. "Of course he'll come," he said too loudly. "He might even come today." "Snow come soon," Saknus persisted. "Not good white boys stay here alone. White boy come with Indians." Matt stared at him. Did he mean go on the hunt with them? The most important hunt of the year? Saknus smiled for the first time. Saknus teach white boy hunt moose like Etienne. White boy and Etienne be like brother. A sudden joyful hope sprang into Matt's mind. He realized at this moment just how anxious he had been. This was a way out. He did not have to stay here alone through the long winter. Then, as swiftly as it had come, this new hope died away. In spite of his longing, in spite of being afraid, he knew what he had to answer. "Thank you," he said. "I'd like to go on the hunt, but I can't do that. When my father comes, he wouldn't know where I had gone." "Leave white man's writings." Matt swallowed hard. "Something might happen to the cabin. He's trusting me to take care of it." "Maybe him not come," Saknus said again, not smiling. "He'll be here soon," Matt insisted. He was ashamed that his voice broke off in the middle of the word. "If he couldn't come, he'd send someone to tell me. He'd find some way no matter what happened. You don't know my pa." Saknus was silent for some time. "White boy good son," he said at last. "But better you come. Saknus glad for white boy be Nequinus." Matt could only keep shaking his head. The man's words had brought a great lump in his throat. "Thank you," he managed. "You've been very good to me, but I have to stay here." Without another word, Saknus held out his hand. Matt put his own hand into the bony grasp. Then the two Indians turned and went away. Etienne had not even said goodbye. There would be no lesson that morning, no story, no tramping in the forest or fishing, not this morning or any other morning. Close to panic, Matt wanted to run after them. He wanted to tell them that he had changed his mind, that he would go with them anywhere rather than stay here alone with winter coming on. But he had set his jaw tight and stood where he was. After a few minutes, he reached for his axe and fell to splitting logs with a fury. He couldn't keep from thinking, however, was he just being foolish or stubborn? Wasn't going with them the wisest thing he could choose to do? Wouldn't his father have understood? He remembered hearing that many white men, and white women too, who had been captured by the Indians and had lived many years in the wilderness, did not want to return to the white world when they had a chance, but had chosen instead to live with the Indians. He had never understood that, but now he could see very well how it might happen. He no longer distrusted them. He knew that Etienne and his grandfather would be kind, that even the grandmother would make him welcome, and that they would share with him whatever they had, no matter how little. He had found friendship and goodwill in their cabin. He had envied Etienne his free, unhampered life in the forest, and the boisterous camaraderie-ship in the village. If he had been taken captive as a child and raised as an Indian boy, how would he have chosen for himself? It wouldn't be the same to make the choice deliberately. He was proud that he had wanted him to live with them, but he knew that he could never really be proud as Etienne was proud of being a hunter. He belonged to his own people. He was bound to his own family, as Etienne was bound to his grandfather. The thought that he might never see his mother again was sharper than hunger or loneliness. This was a land his father had cleared to make a home for them all. It was his own land, too, and he could not run away. He was troubled that Etienne had walked away without a word of farewell. Had he been offended? Had he really wanted Matt to go with them? To be a brother? Or was he only obeying his grandfather, and he had to do as he had to do about the lessons? It was so hard to tell what Etienne was thinking. Etienne had become a hunter. He had a gun. He would not have time now to wander through the forest or to listen to stories. He would not have to bother any longer with a white boy who would never really be a mighty hunter. But surely Etienne could have held out his hand, as his grandfather had done. So that's the end of chapter 21. What would you have done? Would you have chosen to go? Do you think it was wise for Matt to stay behind and take care of the things that his father had left him? Lots of big decisions for a young boy to make. So there we go.